Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about listing pages and admin areas for our projects. So these are kind of key pages for our data-driven projects in that they help the client find their way around their data. In the Delta Zen projects that we do, we've kind of settled on a stock user experience for these listing pages. Essentially, you have the ability to look at the columns that are available in the area, select which ones you want to show, save presets of those selections, click a row to get details on it quickly without having to load another page, and then filter uh, based on any of the fields that are in the database for that section. And then finally export that to Excel once you've got what you want. So with this feature set, it's a relatively straightforward thing to implement when it comes to Zen framework projects. You don't have to really do a lot of HTML or JavaScript coding. You just kind of declare which fields should be displayed and how they can be used. So the bulk of it happens through this available fields API, which you can see being used for the guest and fest maker here. So you're combining fields from multiple different models. Some of them maybe can only be displayed rather than displayed and filtered. And then you're passing that list of available fields to various components to render the page and support all those features that I described. In Dewdrop, which is the library that we've put together to be able to integrate custom database functionality with WordPress, we didn't really have any of those features. In addition to those missing, we have like a different target user experience that we'd want to emulate, and that's the WordPress admin shell itself. So this is the stock pages management and the WordPress admin. We can see, for example, that they've got a screen options pane up here that lets you like show and hide columns. So it's similar to the features that we had, implemented a little bit differently. Filtering in the WordPress admin is very anemic. There's not much to it. There are like one or two filters per section. So there's not a whole lot there. And then they have like normal column sorting, which you can see up here as I hover over a header. So this morning I started working on an API that mimics the Delta Zen API pretty closely, but tries to emulate the WordPress user experience. And I want to kind of introduce the preliminary work on that to you guys today. We're going to start by looking at kind of like how we were doing this in Dewdrop before, and then I'll kind of show where I'm trying to move things. At first, this is primarily for the district, but this will be kind of a standard tool in Dewdrop projects going forward. So before, in a Dewdrop admin plugin, you were doing very, very basic stuff in the PHP. So you had a model, you actually fetched data from that model. So I'm not getting a select object that I'm then going to manipulate to sort and filter and do all that stuff. I'm just getting a data set. So I end up with an array here in this rows. I pass that data to HTML, to the view script, and then the view script is pretty much straight HTML. So I'm responsible for emulating the WordPress user experience and look and feel as much as I can. So for example, these classes here, WP list table, wide fat, fixed, post, all that stuff needs to be there. You need to know those classes exist. If WordPress updates and adds another class there, you're responsible for updating your project. So it's kind of clunky. And you can see that their markup in general is pretty verbose and has a lot of idiosyncratic little things to it. So like the column headers all need to have a span inside of the TH tag. As we get down into the actual body of the table, there are more quirks. So, ID equals the list. And then row actions here in this div to actually draw the links that are available for that row in the table. It's these little guys right here. So there's a lot of little quirks, and for each different section of the admin, you're kind of repeating this. So what I've been working on this morning is a field-driven API for this, and so far I've been working in the businesses section of the district. So your PHP starts to look a little bit more complex. The first thing is on line 18 here, I'm creating a listing object. And this basically does all the non-presentation management of a listing page. So it's responsible for filtering, sorting, and getting the data. The data isn't just fetched anymore. We have a select object so that we can do that filtering and sorting. And then we're adding fields one by one. So it's a lot like the Delta Zend API, a couple of different tweaks to it. So one tweak is that instead of having to always use a reusable cell renderer class like we do in SWAT, if you do have something custom that you want to do as far as rendering goes, you can just pass it a closure to say, I just want to render the contents of this cell. And then also I've built in the concept of kind of default fields and additional optional fields. And I'm not quite comfortable with that wording of add optional field yet. But the idea is that these two are going to be displayed right out of the box. These ones are things you can turn on optionally if you want. And the wording's a little awkward. And then I'm passing that listing object into my view script. And this is where things get quite a bit different than the buildings view script. So basically there are several new view helpers that are consuming that listing object and drawing WordPress style HTML to build the listing. So the first is this WP screen meta, and this is drawing the tabs at the top of an admin page. So these guys here. It has support for doing the screen options exactly as WordPress has it, and support for adding custom tabs that you would put content in yourself manually. So if you wanted to do like a help tab, it supports doing that. And then the other big view helper here is the table view helper. Like most things in Dewdrop, you can just use it in a very simple way like this. So I'm just echo this table, this listing. So I'm basically handing the data controller to it and saying just render the table. I can break that down and be a lot more granular if I want to. So if I grab this, I can do things like this, and that just renders the actual opening table tag. And then I can say render head and give it my columns from my listing object. So I can do that piece by piece if I wanted to maybe do a completely custom T-head section and didn't want to do it in an object-oriented fashion, but just wanted to write the HTML. But also, for the common case, I can just say, echo this table, this listing. So before going into those helpers more, let's actually look at the page functioning. So if I go to the businesses section in the district WordPress plugin now, we'll see by default I've got company name and category displayed. Those are the two fields that I said, display those by default. And then I've got my screen options tab up top that renders just like the WordPress screen options. And as I click columns in here, they immediately show and hide. So I get that feature with very little custom code, just using that list of field objects. So very much like in Delta Zend. I still need to add filtering and sorting. Those are somewhat simpler than the display. But the idea is that you won't have to actually do anything new for each section, just like in Delta Zend. It's just you declare your field list, and then we build a listing page and all of the features related to that off of that list of fields. So that's kind of the goal feature set-wise, is emulate the pages section of WordPress using just a field list. As far as the implementation goes, it's quite a bit different than the Delta Zen side of our projects. So this all lives in Dewdrop, with the biggest part of the data handling code is in Dewdrop fields listing. And this is basically just a field list. It's basically manipulating a select object uh, using a set of fields that you give it. So if I just say add field, that's saying, this field is available for both display and filtering. The optional field is just invisible by default. That's the only difference there. The other thing that is a lot different than the Delta Zen side is you're not just dealing with field objects exclusively. You can create a completely custom column that's not tied back to a database field. So it's very similar to the form API in Dewdrop in that it's not exclusive to tying one-to-one with the database field. The columns are represented by these objects here, which you can see don't even maintain a reference to a database field object. They just have a number of callbacks for the various functions that they're going to execute. If you give it a database field, it's going to come up with default callbacks for all of these. So like the cell callback, if you give it a date field, is going to render a formatted date. But if you wanted to do something completely custom, you could just write your own callback for it. Like you saw in my index.php, I did a custom callback for rendering the contents of the phone number cell. And of course, those callbacks can be closures, like you see here, or they can be references to other functions elsewhere in the code base. So you could have a collection of renderer methods, similar to a SWAT cell renderer if you wanted to do that. But the idea is that you don't have to always cram things through this field API. The field API is just giving you some defaults, and beyond that, you can just do your own custom rendering logic. Same with filtering. If you wanted to do a custom filter, you would just add that directly. You don't have to make kind of a pseudo field or a virtual field like you do in Delta Zen. You just say, hey, there's this filter with this title and this callback for actually changing the select object. So it makes that a lot simpler, and you don't have to contort your code in the odd ways that you do in Delta Zen. As far as the view helpers go, several of these are very WordPress specific. Like WP Screen Meta obviously is emulating something very closely to what WordPress does. The idea is that we would have some non-WordPress specific helpers for other projects that would consume the same listing object but render different HTML and use different JavaScript and so on. The WordPress JavaScript is kind of odd and old school in the sense that as long as you have certain classes and IDs on your checkboxes, it will start just doing stuff. So like for the screen options pane, I didn't have to do any JavaScript. It's just that they're running some selectors in jQuery, looking for certain things in the HTML and then running JavaScript on it. So it's a little odd in that sense. It's not very backbone-like. It's more maybe 2004, 2005 style JavaScript. But that works pretty well in this case where we're just trying to copy them directly. We'll see if we hit problems as there are major upgrades to the WordPress admin shell. But hopefully, by keeping the view scripts as simple as possible like this, we make it so we just have to upgrade Dewdrop, and then all the projects that use Dewdrop automatically kind of stay in line with WordPress.
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
Are there any view helpers or anything special you're doing for specific types of data, or can we even detect the types of data here, meaning Booleans or images or email addresses, URLs?
Yeah, so far, nothing really. When it comes to doing things based on type, this is kind of the model for it in Dewdrop right now. So this is the thing that detects what kind of view helper should be used for editing a field. So I'll have something very similar for displaying the value of a field, but I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay, so I mean, is that possible? I mean, because you're pulling data out of MySQL and
Yeah. So one of the things that I like most about the Dewdrop database API versus normal ZenDB is as we update the schema, we automatically generate a representation of that schema in PHP. So, for example, if I pull up the businesses table here, we have this representation at hand of, there's the business ID column and the businesses table of the database. It's part of the primary key. It's the first column and the primary key. And then it's an identity, meaning it auto increments. Uh, so we can look at this data as we use our models to make decisions. So we get basically the same information we had in ZenDB with Postgres. We actually have a little bit more in Dewdrop because we added some stuff. But so, for example, I can see which unique constraints are on various fields of this table. I can see what foreign key references there are. So in this case, it's saying the category ID column references category ID and business categories.
well, I guess my question was, I guess, on the data type, because I mean, if you had that, as you saw there, you've got fields that are email addresses, but the data type isn't going to be email address; it's going to be string.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there going to be any type of magic methods where we had before, where if it's the logical thing, if we look for reward email or email underscore address or email address or whatever, that it's going
So
to know these things?
basically, that'll be a lot like what I'm doing for phone number here, except instead
Right.
of a completely custom callback, do something like this. So like cell callback. Um, it's something like that. Like you're referencing some renderer to do the drawing for that field.
Right. Okay. So that's coming, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's basically just piggybacking on this cell callback thing, which, like I said, like you might develop a library of those over time. Of like, we've got one for email links, we've got one for phone numbers, we've got one for uh, thumbnails that you can lightbox or whatever.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. Was I know there's probably 6 or 7 that out of the box we would
Yeah.
need. But yeah. Okay.
So next steps that I'm going to try to do tomorrow are just the basic sorting and filtering, and then I'm going to push this up for the district, and we'll kind of use that as the test bed for it. But it's pretty straightforward. You probably know I haven't written API docs or test for it quite yet, but I'll do that before I add it into Git.
Is exporting going to be difficult?
No, exporting I can copy directly from Delta Zen. That doesn't have any dependencies.
Okay.
So I don't know. Any other questions? Cool. I guess the one other little detail before we wrap up, I plan on having in the command line interface a couple of new code generation commands for this. And the idea is that for the view script, you would be able to say how verbose you want the view script to be. So you could either say, just give me the most basic thing that's going to basically aggregate all of these calls into one call. So your view script will be one line long. Or give me something semi broken down like this so I could insert some HTML here and there if I want to. Or give me the most broken down version possible so that I really have the ability to customize and remove entire pieces of what would normally be there. So that's kind of the approach I want to take for the view script portion of it, is just having like 3 or 4 different levels of verbosity that you can pick from. So yeah, I'll throw this up for district within the next day or two, and then this will go into the next Dewdrop release, which will probably be 0.10 or 0.11, something like that.
Cool. Looks
All right.
great.
Well, thanks. I think that's it. So talk to you guys later.
Thanks,
Thanks, man.
Brad.